Hello everyone, welcome to more Political Excess. Today let's take a look at the generic congressional ballot for the month of October. This will help give us a little bit better idea of who might control the House and the Senate. In the previous few months, the Democrats did narrow up the gap and even took the lead. So let's get on Real Clear Politics and see where things are at. So as of the time I'm making this video, Republicans have a 1.0% lead. And if we switch over to 538 to see their model, there the Democrats actually have a 1.2% lead. I prefer Real Clear Politics. More data is usually better, so that's more than a 2% gap. I'm going to get back on Real Clear Politics and look a little bit more into these numbers. So there's a couple that do show the Democrats up 2 and 4 points. There's another tie, and then there's a couple, Trafalgar and ABC News Washington Post, that has the Republicans up. Both of those two polls actually show Republicans at 51%, which is interesting because no one else is even at 48% on either side in any of these polls. Most of these are now using likely voter models, with the exception of this Monmouth poll and Politico. They're still on registered voters. So you can, of course, click on each of these individual polls to get more breakdown of the data, cross-tabs, sample sizes. I do recommend doing that for some of these, especially if there's any outliers. But for me, the most notable poll on here is this Economist YouGov poll, and that shows the Republicans up 1 point, 47 to 46, with 1,054 likely voters. So why is this notable? Well, if you go down here to their previous poll from just 1 week ago, they were using registered voters, 1,300 of them, and they had the Democrats up 5. And they consistently had the Democrats with a mid-single-digit advantage pretty much all summer. So now that they've switched over to likely voters, all of a sudden their results lurched 6 points in just 1 week. That, I think, is very notable. So let's go back up to the graph here. So we all pretty much know the story at this point. Republicans had usually a 2 up to a 4-point lead in the aggregate. For most of the year, things did start to narrow up, starting in July, and then it was neck and neck, with the Democrats even pulling out ahead up until very recently, where the Republicans are now slightly ahead, at least on Real Clear Politics. So what do these results mean? Well, it's hard to know for sure, because there could be polling errors, and I know the Democrats are weary that there is going to be a large polling error. Republicans are actually ahead 2, 3, 4 more points than they are. They wouldn't admit that publicly, but privately you have to have that concern if some of the previous cycles did underestimate and undersample Republican support. And if you're the Republicans, you're going to say that openly, and you especially have to say that if you're down in the polls. You're hoping that they're off again. There's the shy Republican, shy Trump, silent majority type of vote that's going to come out big for you on election day, and they don't talk to pollsters. That's going to be your narrative, because each side has to show something positive, and we're not going to know what kind of error there is in these polls until after the fact. They could get a little bit more accurate as we get close to election day, but there's no guarantees. If we compare to previous generic congressional votes, we can see how accurate these polls were. Last time, 2020, the final aggregate polling had Democrats up 6.8%, but the Democrats actually only won that vote by 3.1%. So that is a 3.7% error in favor of the Democrats. 1 or 2%, that's okay. That's going to be kind of expected. But once you're getting over 3 or 4% like that, that does become a little bit concerning. However, if you go down to the graph that year, it was relatively stable all throughout the final months and into November. So there were no dramatic changes at the end. The polls were just off at the end, and possibly the entire time. Let's go back to 2018, that big blue wave year. That had Democrats in the aggregate up 7.3%, and they won by 8.4%. So they were actually undersampled there a little bit by 1.1%. So that's a little bit of a Republican bias, but nothing too huge. If we go down and take a look at that graph, both party support was relatively stable again throughout the summer and the final months. How about back in 2016? Well, in that year, the aggregate had the Democrats up 0.6%. Republicans actually won it, though, with 1.1%. So that is close to a 2% error rate in favor of the Democrats. And down in that graph, That had a lot of late-breaking movement in favor of the Republicans. Democrats were actually up 6.2% in the aggregate in mid-October, and that's when the Republicans really started to take off in the final 2 to 3 weeks, and they nearly closed the gap in the polling, and they won that popular vote on election night. Let's take a look at one more of these. Back in 2014, that was a red wave year. In the aggregate, Republicans were up 2.4%. They actually won it by 5.7%. That's a 3.3% error rate in favor of the Democrats. And down in that graph, it was kind of neck and neck for a lot of the summer. Democrats were slightly ahead there in September, but then the Republicans shot way up and never looked back. So what does all this mean? Well, for one, it goes to show you really can't predict what's going to happen. Sometimes the poll results are pretty close. Sometimes they do overestimate one party or the other. Usually on the bigger misses, it does favor the Democrats, and that is the concern. I don't think many people are worried that the polls are greatly overestimating Republican support, but it is possible there's been adjustments, and by the time November 8th rolls around, these polls are spot on within 1 point in the aggregate. If they're off again by 3 or 4 points, that is going to leave a stain on the polling industry as a whole. Individual pollsters, they're going to get to brag if they got it right or not. I think they've had enough time to make adjustments to get it fairly accurate, but if some of these Republican voters do not actually want to talk to these pollsters, it can be challenging. But that, of course, would be up to them to be able to adjust for that and figure out some solution so they have credibility going forward. So how about what these current results indicate so far? Well, it does pretty much confirm Republicans are going to capture the U.S. House. It seems to be a guaranteed floor as of now of 10 seats, which would flip it on its own. Somewhere in the 15 to 20 range is probably a little bit more accurate in my estimation. These results now, it would be hard to imagine it getting much higher than 20. If things change and Republicans end up with a 4 or 5 point advantage in the end, yeah, then they're going to have a huge night and they're going to be over 30 seats for sure. I think even if this comes back to a even year, Republicans would still flip 10 seats based on redistricting, trends, etc. The Senate is up for grabs. It's hard to predict. I got to see what comes out over this month. In my Senate prediction, I do have the Republicans very slightly narrowly favored to win it. But the polling for those individual Senate races, that's going to be much more beneficial to gauge who's going to control the Senate. So any momentum the Democrats kind of had a couple of months ago with the Supreme Court decision, with some Biden legislative successes, maybe with gas prices falling a little bit, that probably appears to have stalled out at this point. I think inflation, crime, immigration, I think that all matters, and those are metrics that would be against the Democrats at this point. The cost of living, it's universal. Everybody is affected by that, and it is really horrible out there. It's so hard to imagine the party in power not having a bad night when so many people have lost a lot of their wealth and they cannot keep up with the basic costs. So I think that has to translate into the Republicans having an advantage in the House, probably in the Senate when the time comes. But we will see what the polls show. We'll see how much we can trust the polls. I will look at the congressional vote one more time early in November, and it's going to be fun to see what ends up happening. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about this generic congressional vote? Do you trust these polls? Do you think the Democrats are going to end up surging at the end? Are the Republicans heading for a big red wave? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.